All right, so at this point, I really wanted to open it up to kind of a panel discussion. We've heard from manufacturers, utilities, fleet operators about some of the challenges as well as best practices in adoption of zero-emission vehicle technology with specific emphasis on how we fuel these vehicles, charge them. There are some very specific challenges that are unique to plug-in vehicles, and infrastructure is one of the biggest. We've struggled with it within the state of California's fleet, and I'm sure some of the other fleets in here have struggled with that as well. So I wanted to start with Elizabeth, and a question for you and CEC. So two of the major kind of barriers to EV adoption within fleets are lack of available public infrastructure and the high upfront costs for the installation, right? Laying down new conduit, trenching, the cost can get pretty high pretty quick. This challenge only seems to have grown as electrification of fleets expands into the medium and heavy duty range, larger batteries, need for more electricity. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges you see with the current EV infrastructure, limitations and costs, and some of the things that your organization is doing to work to address some of those challenges?
Sure, absolutely. I think there are actually four major challenges for medium duty and heavy duty infrastructure. The first being costs, like Evan said, chargers can be, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then there's fees for permitting, construction, upgrades to utilities, so it can get very expensive. I think the other three challenges are the electrical load impacts, charger standardization, and then the complex installation, development, and timelines needed to install this infrastructure. So for electrical loads, MDHD vehicles require charging systems with significantly higher voltage and power levels, and so a lot of locations are not prepared to handle the electrical loads, so upgrades are needed to the infrastructure. In areas like ports or areas where all the chargers are located in the same location, it could be seen as an opportunity, though, because you can essentially upgrade a lot of infrastructure at the same time. It's costly, but you do it all at once, and you avoid having to continue to upgrade over time. And then for standardization, medium and heavy duty manufacturers have not yet agreed to a standardized electrical vehicle charger. So whereas light duty chargers, they have 2 or 3 types to choose from. I think right now, medium and heavy duty vehicles have at least 7 different chargers. So it does make it difficult for fleets to install multiple brands and have a diverse group of vehicles when the cost for charging is so expensive, and having to install multiple chargers is required. And for that also, I don't think that's just a California issue. For long haul trucks that go across state, we then need a standard in other states. So, I think this will take some cooperation with other state leaders and other communities. But I think we can look to the light duty sector in this area, like places. We put together the West Coast Electric Highway for light duty, and so drawing on this experience for heavy duty, I think, would be valuable. And then just installation, development, and timelines is a challenge. Installation can take from a couple weeks to a year, over a year, and so just understanding, practicing good planning and understanding the different limitations is very important for installing infrastructure. And so I think where the Energy Commission comes in, emerging technologies is really important. So emerging technologies can address some of the challenges I just described. like inductive or wireless charging, which can be standardized across vehicles. But really, these are in early stage development, so funding is needed. So earlier I described a few of our funding programs. We have our advanced freight and fleet funding, our school bus funding. We also have funding for workforce development, and then regional readiness and planning, which is really meant for regions to plan the rollout of their infrastructure. And under that category, we are working with GoBiz on a permitting guidance document, which should help as infrastructure is installed. And then we're monitoring and practicing and participating in activities with industry groups like Charin for standardization, and then under AB 2127, we are conducting a statewide charging infrastructure assessment, which will include medium duty, heavy duty infrastructure to meet our 2030 ZEV targets.
Wonderful. I'm happy to hear you talk about standardization. It's a challenge for us as a fleet. Standardization, interoperability of charging networks is really kind of something that we have challenges with in rolling out infrastructure. So it's good to hear you talk about that. Dean, Elizabeth talked a little bit about some of the challenges, and two of the challenges that she talked about were kind of the costs as well as the timelines for these infrastructure installations, charging infrastructure installations. Your organization helps fleets procure the requisite infrastructure to support their zero-emission plug-in vehicles. What are some of the best practices that you've seen or experienced in the planning for EV charging infrastructure, and how has PG&E been able to assist and support your fleet customers as they transition over to more of a zero-emission vehicle fleet?
Well, I think understanding what your EV goals are, what are you looking to achieve, engaging stakeholders, not only the people that are going to operate the fleet, but also the facilities, because it's a different mix now than what you had before. You also need to understand your timelines on this and secure that funding. Understand what kinds of funds you have on this fleet. Those are some of the key items.
Wonderful, thank you. John, from a manufacturer's perspective, specifically one who manufactures medium and heavy-duty plug-in vehicles, you have a lot of experience in kind of the technology advancements of batteries. Where do you see battery technology going, and what should fleets be doing now to ensure that the infrastructure that they install today will meet the needs of the vehicles in the future?
Sure. So battery technology right now, we see it standardizing mainly on lithium ion, and you're going to see a huge scaling up of lithium ion battery pack production. Because EVs are getting so popular, it just makes sense to go that route. We at Motive do not make our own batteries. We do not package our own batteries. We buy commercially available battery packs. It turns out to be cheaper if someone else is making 100,000 of these batteries, rather than, I don't know if you've ever watched the process, but it's a tedious process. In the future, I think you will see new battery chemistries and higher battery density, along with improved packaging on the batteries, which will make it lighter and easier with better performance. In terms of infrastructure, when someone asks the question, are there problems with, or has anyone experienced difficulties? I was going to stand up and answer that question for Rob there, but yeah, infrastructure is very, very important. Plan ahead, work with your vendor, find out what type of chargers you really need. Do not go too small on your chargers. Most of the chargers available out there now are for light duty EVs, for cars. What we make needs a real charger, and plan ahead with PG&E and with SMUD and talk to them about what they can do. And if you're pulling in 400 amps, maybe pull in 800, because if you're buying 5 vehicles now, you will buy 15 more in the next couple of years. We've seen it several times with customers. As soon as you get 2, 3, 4, 5 up and running, you see the fuel savings and the maintenance, you are going to buy more. And you don't want to have to go back to them every single time. So plan ahead and get more than you need. If you are doing DC fast charging, if you have a real need for DC fast charging, plan for that as well and make sure that you have a rate schedule that's going to work with that. Personally, I don't see the need for it in very many locations outside of airport shuttles, that sort of thing that runs constantly. But, you know, there may be that sort of thing. Remember, the chargers are not necessarily the expensive part, especially if you're looking at a level 2 charger. In terms of the overall charging infrastructure, you can buy the bare minimum for what you really need right now and then replace it in 4 years when there's a new capability out there. Everyone's speaking V2G, and it's wonderful, great technology, but I don't think anyone's quite ready for it right now. So if you're looking to deploy right away, you might not need to go that expensive of a charger.
Wonderful. So we can't use the 110 outlet anymore for the, in the future?
I plug, my EV plugs into, it's a level 1, I plug into 110
110,
outlet.
all right.
But yeah, but it's a golf cart.
That's music to some of my fleet managers' ears.
Mine's a golf cart.
We use level 1 charging.
All right. Philip and Jacob, we've talked a lot about kind of the cost to install EV charging infrastructure. And Philip, you kind of touched on this in your presentation, but that's not the only cost associated with using this infrastructure and using zero-emission vehicles. We still need to fuel them. And these costs can vary widely depending on the vehicle that you have plugged in, the time of day, you know, the rate of charge, all of these different factors. And if there's one thing I know, fleet managers like predictability, right? Like to know the costs of the fuel that they are consuming. So I guess my question to you is, what are some of the ways that you've been able to mitigate some of that uncertainty and lower your electricity costs when charging your fleet vehicles? And maybe, Jacob, we can start with you.
Well, at SMUD, we know somebody and we get a pretty good rate.
Maybe I shouldn't have asked you that question.
Sorry. But what I will say as far as cost and planning, and it's been said here a couple of times, is plan, and overbuild, and be prepared for what's going to come down the pipe 5 years from now. And we have some examples of that where, you know, if you're going to pave a parking lot, you might as well put conduit underneath it. I mean, you might as well. And you want to go with, you know, the big conduit, because you never know what's going to come next. And we've had instances where we've been able to do that, and we've had instances where we wished we would have done that. Currently now, one of the issues that we're facing is, if I can explain this right, that many operators, they want to be able to park and charge and go, and it makes it advantageous, or basically for every vehicle you have to have a designated charger and a parking spot for. So we're trying to work and plan around that and figure out a way where we can have, you know, if we can work a 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, depending on, you know, the load, the charging needs and whatnot. But we have, you know, currently we have about 110 chargers, and we're looking to add about 80 this year, but at some point that's going to taper off, and, you know, people need to share. How do you schedule that? You know, do you want your employees coming out 2 times a day, moving their cars around? You know, there's just a bunch of little things you got to coordinate and think about along with charging that will cost money either directly or indirectly, that you need to, you know, set policy around. So those are some of the issues that we're continuing to work through.
Wonderful. Philip?
Yeah. So you kind of hit the nail on the head for one of the things that's been providing me my biggest headache for the last couple of years. Gas prices are pretty volatile, right? It's really hard to budget year to year. Every fleet manager knows this. one year your fuel budget might be $3 million, maybe it's 3.6 the next year. 20% swings in fuel prices are, I mean, look at the price right now, right? It happens all the time. It's really, really volatile, really, really hard to plan for. But the way that we fuel, the price doesn't really change throughout a day. If it's 4.16 today, it's at 8 in the morning, it's going to be the same thing at 4 in the afternoon. That's not the case with energy for time of use rates. And it's really frustrating. In EVs in our fleet, like we've got stations at about 12 different facilities in my agency. We're looking to keep expanding. So if someone checks out one of our Chevy Bolts or Nissan Leafs in our fleet, they take it and they go to a meeting and they start charging at 11 a.m. because there's a charger that's at the place where they're going, and then they keep a charge for another hour and a half. So maybe it's 12:30 by the time they leave. And they come back and then they charge it at 5 o'clock at the end of the day, and then it charges for a couple hours. So we went from off peak to on peak to part peak. At 3 different prices in one day. And then, in winter it changes, and then it changes again in the summertime. So the price of energy, and then we went to 2 different sites. So maybe that was a different rate tariff, right? So the prices are different at that building than they are at my fleet center. Maybe an E19 rate for energy nerds here, maybe it's an A1 rate somewhere else. So different rate tariffs change the pricing. So it's kind of shown where I think the EV world has been very focused on the B2C, the individual consumer market, and now we're really starting to see people get into the B2B fleet market, where we're providing these software tools. Telematics companies are jumping in, software companies are coming in where they're taking all your data and they're doing really interesting things with it, where they can track accurate fuel costs by site. Like that's new, and it's really exciting, because it's really frustrating when someone asks you, oh, how much money did you spend on your EV fleet last year? I'm like, oh, okay, well, I've got this spreadsheet with pivot tables, and I'm trying to figure out, like, oh, where did this charge there? Like, the data's all there. We just need, people are getting into the space to move it. So I just kind of reiterated the problem, actually. So there's people that are working on it, which is really exciting. And then, we're shifting off peak when we can to lower the cost. We're trying to avoid demand charges, which is much more influential towards our bill than when it's charging. It's how many are charging at one time. So we're really looking at that. But I mean, the most important thing is to stop using gas. It's just, no matter really when you're charging, although we can get really bad and then it can be really expensive, but for the most part, it's always cheaper than gas unless you're really messing things up. So for us, we're really, that's the most important thing.
Okay. So we've heard CEC, PG&E, and our fleet operators kind of talk about, some of the incentives that are out there, to get the infrastructure installed, to purchase the equipment, to manage kind of the use, to make sure that you maximize or minimize the cost, I guess, of your electricity consumption. Have any of you had experience with trying to capture or monetize some of the LCFS, low carbon fuel standard credits, that you can get, and try and use that revenue to offset some of the infrastructure costs? I think that's a really kind of cool way to bring another revenue stream in. And if I'll just open it up, Philip, you seem to have some experience, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we get LCFS credits for our charging stations, which are great. So thank you, State of California. And while I'm on a panel, thank you, CEC, because you have also funded 2 of our projects in the last few years. So I'd be remiss if I did not thank you, CEC. So we go after LCFS credits, but also for people who are thinking about installing charging stations in a commercial application, we get a lot of revenue from selling electricity to the public. So when like I said, we installed about 150 stations. About 100 or so are available to the public. There's more stations that are available to the public than are behind the fleet fence. And we did that very intentionally because our employees wanted them, obviously. But we also have a lot of public visitors come to our municipal buildings. And so we charge people to use them. And we take that money and we put it back into our EV program. So that's another revenue stream in addition to LCFS and state grants and all that stuff.
Wonderful.
I just recently, I think last Friday, walked into one of my customers' offices, and he was smiling from ear to ear because he had just been given a check for almost double what he paid for electricity last quarter. So the check was from his LCSF credits was so big that it covered their electric bill, their renewable diesel, and their propane CNG bill for the entire quarter.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge.
We have a similar model where we use that LCFS credit money, we put it back into research and development in our EV program.
Nice. So I know we're running short on time, and I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask a few questions. So I'm going to wrap this up with one final question for the panelists. What last piece of advice or recommendation would you give an organization that's planning future EV needs and doesn't know where to start? So let's start all the way over there.
There's a wealth of information on the internet with PG&E, with SMUD, to help guide some of those processes in the planning phase. But really just plan, and then take some time, go out and visit some people who are having some success with it. You're welcome anytime to come and see SMUD. Or there's other operators, I'm sure, in the district or the county who would be, welcome to have you come and look at their success and some of the things that they've been able to implement.
I would build off that. I would say planning and plan maybe 5-10 years. It's a lot of work up front, but I think it's worth it. And reach out to early adopters and pioneers that have already started facing some of these challenges, and ask them for their experiences and their advice. And then I think it's okay to make mistakes. The technology is changing really fast, and everything we're learning now is going to build on what we do in the future, so don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Well, and I echo on the planning side. I talked about engaging the stakeholders and timelines and securing those funds. On the infrastructure, I'm talking to the Google, I'm talking to the trucking firms, the transit agencies, the schools out there. On the infrastructure, understand your site plan. Where are you going to park these vehicles? What's underground? Are there fiber there? Is there electrical cables? Is there catch basins? Is there fuel tanks? You might have to move where those vehicles are, okay? Trenching through trees and things like that is very expensive, okay? And then on the fuel side, the charging of the vehicle, understand the time of use plans. So time of use is something that all of us have to deal with today. Before, the utilities used to be out there pulling all those levers, right? Real time, monitoring the load on the grid. And we would fire up peaker plants and other power plants, right, to make sure there's enough electricity. Now we're asking the consumers to do that. That's the whole point of time of use. So when electricity is the most expensive, we want you to decrease your electricity use. Don't charge your electric vehicle then, all right? But when electricity is the cheapest, we want you to use more electricity. A good way to do this, to be ahead of the game, battery technology. Have that battery there. It acts like a spring, okay? Charge that battery when the grid is the cheapest, okay? And when the price of electricity is the highest, like in that new rate plan I told you about, from 4 to 10, it's going to be the highest, because that's when solar's going down, people are coming home, turning on the air conditioner, starting dinner for the family. That's not when you want to charge your electric vehicle off the grid, okay? That's when we have to fire up all these greenhouse gas polluting plants that we don't want, right? Have a battery on site. Use smart battery technology to charge that electric vehicle, okay? Understand the game, understand how to use it to your advantage, like these low carbon credits. That's how you're going to win.
Wonderful. Thank you. Philip?
So I say don't wait. The IPCC says we don't have time to wait if we're going to avoid climate catastrophe. So that's not an excuse to stop waiting. Start right now. Start before you get EV infrastructure in. If you look at the way fleet managers look at how we buy cars, we look at what's the need, what is this asset being used for, like what's the operational need. We're going to find the best vehicle to fit that need. And so whether you're doing that at a company, a logistics company, a private company, your personal vehicle, Most vehicles are underutilized anyway, especially personal vehicles. So if you've got a car that's going to sit around for, 14 hours a day, longer even, just start with level 1 charging. You can plug that into a wall. If you're going to come back and it's 6 p.m. and I can use it again until 8 a.m. the next day, all right, you've got 14 hours of level 1 charging. You can start right now, get people comfortable with an EV, and then roll out infrastructure for harder use cases later. But don't wait. We kind of don't have time for you to wait. So get started now.
2 points. First off, like we said, future-proof. Go in with the infrastructure that you're going to need. There are a lot of refunds, rebates, and credits right now to help you do that. And secondly, work with your vendor. I have guys that will come out and do site surveys for you to let you know what you can do and where you can do it. Just work with the vendors, and if you absolutely don't want to deal with your charging, there are companies out there, I don't know if you were here earlier, but companies like Amply that will do it for you and then charge you. So don't be afraid. There's always a way to do it. It is the more difficult part of my job is working in the infrastructure for charging, but it is doable, and like you said, don't wait. Just move ahead.
And quick plug, Amply is here. They're at the back of the room, so helping you out a little bit. Wonderful comments. Thank you all. Basically, I heard start now, plan, 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 and plan for the future. If you don't need it now, expect that you're going to need it down the road. Now I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments from the audience, if we have any. I think we have time to maybe take 2.
Yeah, I think most organizations that implement EVs have one or more EV champions. You wouldn't have 5. 6 of them right now. And these people are largely responsible for introducing the EV into the organization. But there's a lot of people now that be on board to make a successful by that successful maximizing the life cycle cost savings, minimizing or maximizing emission reduction. So that takes make sure the right vehicle is in the right application. The drivers have to be on board, plug in when they're done, or find public charging when they're out. The facility manager has to make sure that charging location is convenient. They have to make sure that, for example, that your EV isn't parked at the airport 3 days a week and not being used. So it's like the miles are So I'm really always interested in hearing stories about how things maybe didn't work out at first, or how things what had to be changed from top to bottom.
Sure.
So my team has been diving into a lot of behavior change and social psychology about this stuff. Just because you put EVs out there doesn't mean people are going to use them. So we look at our data, and they show we were getting, in applications where people had a choice, because we also have like an internal rental fleet, when people had a choice between a gas car and an EV, not only were they choosing the gas car in terms of number of trips, but also number of miles were driven on the gas cars, which kind of makes sense if you're driving farther, but the number of trips, they should at least be on par. We got out of our fleet offices and we went to the employees' offices, and we've done a lot of hands-on training, a lot of hands-on work, which is what people are going to have to do. There's a lot of social psychology that shows that people will learn from their peers more quickly than they will learn from someone from the fleet office coming in and telling them what to do. So, we feature communications that come from, like our nurse, like Nurse K over at our public health office is one of our internal EV champions. So we put her on posters, not us. We feature her. And she's like, yeah, I go out and visit people with health problems as part of my job. I don't want to be contributing to that. So I drive a county's electric vehicle. So we do a lot of that, a lot of hands-on stuff, and the behavior change stuff has been really effective for us. We've been seeing higher utilization, more people using their charging stations correctly. So that is time-consuming and a little bit out of our wheelhouse at first, but that was a real important thing that we did.
And I'll add on to that. Similar to Philip, approaching this from all angles is really the best way to get further adoption, right? It's really nice having a strong mandate from up above, and we do have a very strong mandate, and it empowers us to be able to push these vehicles out into our fleets, but we take a multitude of different angles to approach this. For example, our parking structures that we have downtown, we offer discounted pricing to anybody, in front of the line privileges to anybody who has an electric vehicle, because we know that if you are willing to adopt an electric vehicle in your private life, you're more likely to be willing to drive that vehicle in your professional life. You're comfortable with it. You know the technology, you know the range, so when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we're thinking about switching out this internal combustion engine vehicle for a battery electric, you're like, sweet, I got one of those at home, I'm comfortable with it. We've offered employee pricing or discounts on our statewide contracts so that employees are incentivized to go out and purchase these vehicles in their private lives. And then we do events like this. We partner to try and educate our fleet managers, local fleet managers, the public, try and get them comfortable with this technology. And it takes all of these different angles to really kind of move the needle.
And vice versa. So we did some follow-ups when employees use our, this is intuitive, but when employees use EVs at work, they've already got the familiarity with it, and they don't own it. They're just using it for work. They're just using it to go to meetings. They're more likely to buy them for their personal vehicles afterwards. So it's a nice way, having them at work, they can kind of, no risk, jump into it and then think about it.
Great point.
I can just comment that we've had, it can't be understated enough how much a vehicle is it's just so personal to them. It's just an understatement to think, even if it is a company vehicle, sometimes it's just so personal to people to switch from gasoline to electric. But we've had some success by just, we have similar events to this. We have, a ride and drive at work, and we have, a Volt, a Prius, a Volt, a couple of different options, and you can contact some of these dealerships and have them bring vehicles in and do a mini ride and drive right there at work. And it does vary, adoption kind of does vary by demographic, age group, and things like that, but it is catching on, and more, we see electric vehicles every day now, so it is catching on.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. All right. Oh, Mike.
Since you're all experts in what is your prediction, put on your Nostradamus hat? In America, when do you think the last internal combustion engine will be sold non-military applications?
Stepping away from that.
I think it's going to be a long time for all applications. It is my job to get these things on the road, but I do not ever tell anyone, you need to go completely into the electric right now, because there are going to be applications that require ICE engines for a while. The power's there, battery range, not quite exactly yet, but it's getting there, and it's getting there quickly. So I think it'll be a while still. But with that said, it's blowing up right now. Like you said, in Long Beach, the floor had changed from CNG propane to mostly electric, and chargers. A lot of chargers there too. Not actually blowing up. The market's hot.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I see this as a disruptive technology, just like the smartphone. Things are going to be changing quickly. I think it's going to be a while before all of the internal combustion engines are gone. It might be 50 years. But the work that Tesla's doing really sets a benchmark for the light-duty fleet and maybe also for the medium heavy-duty fleet. Before it was really cool to have an electric vehicle. It was different. They looked different. But now people are talking numbers, 0 to 60. What kind of range can you get with this? it's pretty much doing a smackdown on internal combustion engine on the light duty side. And I see a great opportunity on medium and heavy duty fleets because you know where that truck is going to be parked. You know the route it's going to take. It's already prescribed. You know when it's coming back. I mean, use that information to your advantage. The weak link right now is the battery. The range of the battery, how long it takes to fuel that battery. You know, to fuel a transit bus is 15 minutes or less, right? Or a semi, right? It takes longer to fuel a battery vehicle. The other thing is the cost. You know, if you look at these Teslas, the Model S, I've heard people say, well, it's a $30,000 car with a $30,000 battery on it, right? As the battery technology improves, the cost is going to drop. There's a lot of, you know, predictions out there. There's also new battery technology coming online. Solid state batteries, dry cell battery, okay? That's going to also increase the production level too, because a dry cell battery has a production footprint 1/16 of the wet battery technology. So they can squeeze more out of a factory. So with those kinds of gains, I only see more good things happening for EVs.
So I'll say in terms of running a municipal fleet, about a quarter of my vehicles could probably be switched over to EVs tomorrow if we had the right infrastructure in place for it. A quarter, I need the market to move along a little bit. This is like light cargo that there's just really nothing there yet. Like kind of like Nissan NV or Transit Connect style vehicles need that to happen. And then the other half is law enforcement. So you know, that's going to be the last kind of piece for, I mean, it's really tricky because they run 12-hour shifts. They're always in use for the most part. There's millions of them out there. So we either need really heavy-duty charging or we need like maybe battery swapping to come back into the equation for a commercial application in use or something like that. That needs to happen. And then we're talking like all that can go EV. I think that's all those cases can go EV with those caveats. And then like the 1% kind of stuff is like your search and rescue trucks, like really low application things that sit for months and months and months and months and then occasionally get used. Like those could be gas, you know, we're talking like major cataclysmic apocalyptic stuff. Like you kind of maybe want some things that are, at least in the technology now for like emergency preparedness stuff. But I mean, that's like the only one on the top of my head that I would say is not a good candidate for an EV in the relatively near future.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No,
I'll just say, you know, I think the light duty is going to go really fast, and medium duty, heavy duty is going to go a little bit slower. Not all the technology is there yet for all applications, but I think at least in California we have policies and incentives that really support development of these technologies and getting them moving quickly. So.
Yeah, along those lines, I have a fleet operator that has identified 147 vehicles in California that he can replace with full electric. They're step vans, they're delivery vans, they're not carrying super heavy loads. So what he's going to do, because California does have the incentives, we're going to find every single incentive we can for him. He's going to put 147 vehicles here in California and take the equivalents out of state. Where it makes sense, it's coming quickly.
Yeah, I think I'll leave you just with this, that it's interesting when you know, you're at one of these shows and the CEO of Daimler Trucks stands up on stage and says the future is electric. Right? And I think that says a lot. I think that says that the market's moving now. Now, obviously, it's going to take some time, and there are certain applications where it's going to be harder than others. But when you have the CEO of a major truck manufacturer saying that publicly on a big stage, that says a lot about where we're going and kind of the speed at which we're moving. So with that, I wanted to wrap up this panel session and extend a huge thank you to the panelists. Please join me in a round of applause. Thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you all.